Welcome to Know What I Mean. My name's George.
My name's Oscar. Um, yeah, just as we stopped recording there, I said this was a weird one because it was quite a weird one. It was
Yeah,
definitely a windy, tangential, like sort of like unexpected path of an episode.
yeah,
It was a bit of a therapy session at the beginning, I felt, and then we kind of just went into like just being, just there being a passion about spiritual insight and just inquiring into oneself and dish out a little bit of advice there as well for yeah yeah
and there was we talked about loneliness as well, which I think was actually really cool to talk about. There was some really nice stuff in here, and I think there's kind of some practical stuff, some interesting stuff that people might want to think about. So I hope you enjoy the journey, and let's get into the episode.
I picked the quote for this week, and it was one that I was listening to a podcast called Solo, and this isn't a quote like you're gonna find on Goodreads or a quote book or something like that. It was just literally something that someone said on the podcast, and it goes like this: if I wasn't here, would anyone notice? And it was a guest on this show called Kimberley Wilson. The podcast it was from, called Solo, it talks about being lone workers, like self-employed or working from home on your own, for example. And that's the theme of this podcast. And this particular episode was really focusing on loneliness and the potential for loneliness as someone working from home. I was listening to the episode because, I mean, I have been working at home for the last year, as a lot of people have. But I'm also, like, in a few days going freelance, and then I'm not even in Zoom calls with anyone. I'm 100%, I'm doing this on my own. So that was why I was listening to it. And I guess it just, as a question, if I wasn't here, would anyone notice? My association with that immediately, and I think the context of it really was like, that's one of those questions when you're feeling low and you're feeling lonely, like you're alone and you're uncomfortable with that. I think that's one of the questions that arises. That's one of these kind of deeper fears that underlies what's going on. Does anyone care that I'm here, or does anyone even know that I'm here? And I guess this episode and this quote stood out to me because I've been reflecting quite a lot on loneliness recently anyway. And I've found that I think I have become a bit lonely, actually. It's not actually in the sense of that I don't have enough friends. I think it's more of a sense of belonging in a group and a sense of being quite isolated. So I'm doing a lot of like meetups with one person here, one person there, going for a little coffee, and then doing a few online things. But it's very fragmented and just bits and pieces. And my sense is that what I'm really yearning for is to belong. So when listening to this episode, it was really recognizing, I do want to belong, and I want to find my people and my group, and I have a tendency of both yearning for that and then also not putting myself in positions where that's going to happen. So not investing in groups. So I remember at uni, I always had the option to really invest in a group, and for some reason would just hold back from doing that. So that seems to be a bit of a theme in my life, of not completely committing to being part of a group. I don't know why. Maybe we can kind of unpack that a bit in this episode somehow. But so I think the main thing is just being that this quote is coming from that place of loneliness. And this theme of loneliness has been quite prominent for me at the moment. So that's why I picked it.
Yeah, I think that's interesting what you're saying about the noticing, like, because being within a group of people, that is, the noticing really is like you're seeing that other person, you're connecting with them in a way, and to be someone who, if you weren't there, people would notice. That means that you're connected with these people. You have a connection and you're really part of their life. And so much of how we build our identity and as social creatures so much of who we are and how we think of ourselves is based on what other people think and our connections with other people. And I think that connection within a group really is deeply nourishing for the soul, or whatever you want to call it. And even as someone, I'm definitely more introverted in general, similar to you. Like I enjoy spending time on my own, and I can be the same as well, not fully committing to groups and maybe feeling like a bit of an outsider and not really jumping in and being fully within the group. I'm not fully sure really why that is, but that's definitely something that I feel as well. And I think I've got better at it as I've got older. I've definitely found, actually recently, one thing I found that has been really nice was with my jiu-jitsu group, how, especially now I've been there for quite a while, I'm really building a lot more bonds with the people there. And we're always there, usually 3 times a week. So if I'm not there, I've had people reach out to me and see like, hey, what's up, man? How come you weren't at training? Or especially if you miss like 2 sessions in a row. And I would say the same to other people, people I haven't seen there for a while. I'll be like, hey, what's up, man? You all good? Haven't seen you at training. And I found that's been a really nice addition to my life. And it is a way of caring about each other. And it is noticing, oh, this person wasn't at training today. And they normally are. So let me just go and see what's up with them, see how they're doing. So that's been a really valuable thing in my life. And it's felt like it's become more valuable recently because I have committed more to it and to really strengthen those relationships with the people I train with.
Yeah, it's a nice idea that it's something quite simple, like just reaching out and just asking, just inquiring, like, oh, where are you at? Like you were missed, I noticed that you weren't there. And I can imagine with jiu-jitsu, you've got this shared interest. It's not necessarily like there's like loads of similarities in the rest of life necessarily, but you've got this shared passion. I don't know. Do you find that that's fine, that it's not like these people it doesn't have to be connecting on every level?
That's funny. I was thinking about this recently, like, oh, I should start being better friends with some of the people from jiu-jitsu and like hang out with them outside of the class, and I don't know, go and meet up and get a drink and hang out. But when I think about it, I just imagine that when we're there, we would just want to roll, which is like when you spar in jiu-jitsu. I was thinking like that would be the funnest thing that we could do. That would be the thing that I'd want to do. Like we'd be in the park and we'd end up just like, it would break out into like a sparring match. So I was like, actually, why do I feel like we need to do other things outside of this? For us to be proper friends is that we need to go get beers together and all hang out, all go to each other's birthday parties, all of these things. It's just not necessary. You can just have that really meaningful relationship with people you train with regularly every week. And yeah, there might be some people that you meet up with outside of that, but the vast majority, it might just be, that's just what we love doing together, and let's just enjoy that.
Yeah, that makes me think of how I think there's a lot, I can't say more expectation because I'm not sure, but it seems that, well, I definitely have an expectation myself that I need to be connecting with people on lots of levels for there to be a proper friendship. I have to be able to be very open with them. I have to, be able to go for beers with them, but then also like have some sort of shared interest and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know if that's maybe because the way that I link that up in my head is how the expectation we put on like romantic relationships, actually, like how we have to find a partner that is everything, that is our best friend, that we have shared interests with, that, we want to be with all the time, hang out with all the time, that we can be vulnerable with. All of these things they're not really based on the human experience of of love relationships, of being in like a partnership with someone, it's not based off that. It's actually like an ideology. It's like it's not even that old, you know, as an idea, you know. It's like it's a thing from the Romantics, you know, and that we're going to find this one person and they're perfect, and I'm wondering if maybe that idea seeps into friendships as well, you know, that we need well-rounded friendships that kind of touch every base. That's limiting, as you say, like you're wanting to kind of shoehorn lots of other things, you know. Oh, if this is to be real, then we can't just meet up in jiu-jitsu. We've got to be mates elsewhere and do this and that, and you know, and actually, yeah, you don't need to have that expectation. That's just going to be painful if you hold on to that, and then you go for drinks and it's a bit awkward or something. Then it's like, yeah,
essentially, I wasn't thinking we'd get into this, because when I heard the quote, obviously I didn't have it in context, and it's quite a strange thing. So I was like, what the hell is this going to be about? But it's really interesting because it has been something that I've been thinking about a lot recently as well. But when I was thinking about this question, I was like, let me see where this question leads. And I found that, you know, if you just think about it, like, if I wasn't here, would anyone notice? Where are you going to go with that? You're going to think, well, you know, obviously there's going to be some people who notice. It's going to vary person to person, but there will be some people who will notice your absence in some way. But whoever you are, as you either go further out to people you know less well, and then to all the strangers in the world who've never met you and will never have any interaction with you, or you go into the future of, like, in 100 years, will people notice that you were here? Like, whoever you are, if you go through this process, you're eventually going to get to the point where, okay, yeah, people aren't really going to notice. Like, it's a question that can really lead to that. And I think it's really quite a neurotic question. And like you said, it's something that can come up as an insecurity and just arise, but I think it's really not a helpful question. It can inform you of some things. It can basically say, like, how connected do you feel to people? If you really feel like, yeah, a lot of people would notice, that's a sign that, you know, you're connected to people. And if you think, people wouldn't really notice, then, you know, it's a sign that you don't really feel like you're very connected. But from there, where do you go? Like, what action do you take? Because you're just going to kind of feel insignificant eventually if you go through this process and realize that, you know, on the grand scheme of things, not loads of people are going to notice around the world, and not loads of people are going to notice in the future. So where would you go? It's like, do you try and get more people to notice you? That's just a very, you know, a needy thing, and a like a putting the cart before the horse sort of thing. Because naturally, if you're leading a life that's meaningful, and you're forming connections with people, and helping your friends, you know, accomplish their goals, helping your family, and just having fun with people, then people are obviously going to notice when you're not there. But you don't want to have the noticing as like your primary thing, because that's just going to lead to you really just trying to get attention from people. Oh yeah, this actually reminded me of a little bit from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where just this whole thing of, you know, as you keep going out, feeling more insignificant, really. And there's this thing called the total perspective vortex, which is essentially this machine that shows you, you know, just for a second, shows you the absolute vastness of space and how inconceivably tiny you are in relation to it. And it's a form of sort of torture, where everyone who goes into it just completely loses their mind and just can't comprehend, and it's just horrendous. But there's this character, 𝗢𝗲𝗿, who goes in, and he's like a very sort of cocky guy, and he just goes in and comes out the other side. And, you know, the guy who's running it is like, and did you see yourself in relation to the vastness of space? And he's like, yeah, man, it's really big. What did you feel? And he's like, just found out what I knew all the time. I'm a pretty cool guy. And it just stuck with me for some reason, that thing, how some people perhaps could go through this process and be like, you know what? Everyone would notice. People would really notice if I was gone. But yeah, I love the Hitchhiker's Guide. It's got so many of these weird little things in it that are really enjoyable.
When I heard this woman say this, I guess one of the things that came to mind was that, well, there was something almost childlike about it and very innocent about, I guess, not so much the question in isolation, which is exactly what I gave you, but is what's the base of this question? You know, what's that urge to be recognized or to be seen? And yeah, and we touched on it a bit earlier, but I think there's something very innocent about it, like, you know, just this desire to be noticed and accepted within, well, by people in a group. You know, there's something primal about it, and I found it quite soft as I guess, because it's a vulnerable question to ask. You know, it's something you might think in lower times and feel quite vulnerable, kind of think, having that line of thought. But from that place, what do you act like? How do you act? Like, what do you actually do about that? Because it's definitely not a case of that. Yeah, the important thing is that we then go out and get noticed and rely solely on external validation for our sense of being. Because there is something intrinsic in this, in a way, in that question, which is saying, you know, if I'm not noticed, then what am I? You know, I am insignificant, or I'm not really worthwhile. I guess that's kind of woven into it. And it makes me think of, for me, yeah, as I mentioned all the time, like my social media platform that I'm really kind of addicted to, I guess, is Instagram. And that, in a way, is really, it taps into this human need to feel recognized and validated within the group, and to have other people tell you that, you know, you're okay and you do exist, don't worry, kind of thing. And it cashes in. It really just says, I'm just going to dig right into that, you know, and really kind of and this whole thing is kind of built on external validation. So if I put up a post, then I'm, you know, every like and comment is somehow evidence of my existence. But it's so quick, you know, within a couple of days that all goes, and then I have to put a new post up. And that's very painful as well. So it's not a case of like, oh, I need other people, like I have a need to be seen, and so that's what I'll do, is I'll just go out and I'll just try and get that as much as possible, and that will somehow calm this sense of, oh, do I exist or not? And like, that's not the answer in that case, because everyone's experience, you know, it's like, it's so temporary, and it's very it's not very deep. It's quite a shallow sense of being validated. It's very quick and just okay, there you are, and then you're kind of on to the next thing, and then then you start deflating again, because you're kind of inflated and then you kind of deflate again. So my sense is that it's a balance. It's like accepting that there is this human need to be seen by others, and at the same time reflecting on and noticing, you know, intrinsic value of just being alive. And I think that's where a spiritual practice is very helpful, is if you sit and do nothing for a certain amount of time, there is this possibility of dropping into this well of awareness or aliveness. There's no input, there's no one telling you anything. There is this intrinsic power and beauty that is actually within you and within me and within everyone. And it's incredibly deep and strong when, I mean, it's always there, but when it can be tapped into. And that is, it goes well beyond getting validation off Instagram. It shows a sense of like real potent validity that you have without the need to be told that. So it's like, it's this middle way of like recognizing the human quality of needing validation and recognizing inherent value that you have simply by being alive, just by being a breathing human. That value is there.
Yeah, no, that's such a good point, because I think if you just think if you're very caught up in your image of yourself, and that image of a self is constructed based on your feedback in the world of like what people think of you. Do people think you're a good person? Also, it can be, do I think I'm a good person based on how I've behaved? And you construct this narrative of who you are. And if you're completely identified with that as you, then you feel like the need to have validation or to have people like you, and to have all this validation coming in constantly to prop up and confirm this story about you and who you are. And obviously that's something that just naturally arises, and it's something that arises in my life, and I feel myself being very identified with that a lot of the time. But through meditation, you can realize that this image of a self, this story of you and who you are and how you relate to the world, that is not everything, because there is something that is experiencing that self, which is allowing that self to arise, allowing that story of who you are to arise. There is, through meditation, you can see the space around that story and the screen or the environment in which that is happening, and that story of you and who you are is part of the experience that you're having. It's mixed in with your sight and your vision, which are both the same thing. your hearing, all of your senses and all of your thoughts, that's all within one area, and your idea of who you are is contained within that experience as well. The same way within that experience you contain your idea about who your friends are, who your families are, how you think the world is. And through meditation, that can be such a great way to realize that there's another aspect to you and to being alive. And I think that can, if this is a question that's quite painful for you as you're contemplating it, I think that could be particularly helpful to do, to try and see through it, and it will lessen the suffering that you might feel, because you realize that that's not all there is. That image and that story is not the entirety of your world.
Yeah, it's actually sort of dwarfed by the power and kind of depth of the container that holds it. And it's one of those things where it's incredibly difficult to put into words, and there is a possibility of it just sounding almost like nonsense, and that's why I think meditation, I mean, a lot of people have experiences of recognizing the witness, or recognizing the source, or who you are, who is the perceiver, who is the one which is animated, by life, not just the objects of perception, but who is the one really experiencing that. It's very difficult to intellectualize and try and get your head around, because thought is being perceived by this awareness. So using thought to see through it it's difficult. I'm sure there's some great kind of metaphors with tools and etc. But another way that people get a sense of this is through psychedelics. Like that has been like incredibly eye-opening for a lot of people, because it can kind of snap the fixed sense that this is just the way that things are. This is the world. This is exactly, and it's fixed, and this is just how it is. And it can just shift that and give. It's sort of like going traveling or something like that, and you just see the world in a very different light. You see a totally different culture, and you come back and you're like, all right, the world isn't the UK. There's so much more going on here. Yeah, and through meditation and through reading, like a book that I'd recommend on this is just one that I'm rereading at the moment is A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, and it really goes into this a lot. Highly recommend. Yeah, I feel like we got caught onto this sort of like awareness, perceiving witness thing, and we've just like totally ran with it now. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, no, I think I think it's a really interesting area, and I do think it does tie into the quote. If someone was listening to this and was like, wow, that sounds, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about, but that sounds interesting to kind of see what they're on about. What would you say is like a good place? Obviously you recommended the book, but like is there anything you would recommend them try first or something to look into?
I think there's we've already talked about a few portals, because in a way that they are portals. It's like because what we're talking about is insight, really. What we're talking about is having insight into a different way of seeing things, going from, as this quote is talking about, I guess, going from a place of having validation from other people, that's what molds the perception of who you are and makes you of value. Going from that place, which again, there's not like anything that's not unique to any individual. That is all human beings do that. Going from that exclusively, that seeking an external means to work out who you are, sort of just like constantly mirroring back, like, what am I? And then throwing things out. Can you tell me who I am? You know, does this tell me, does identifying with this mean, you know, total external seeking as to who actually am I? Going from that place and flipping it on its head and seeing an intrinsic value that you already have. So it's very it is quite radical, really. It's quite a kind of revolution in perception. And so and what I've realized is that's, as with anything, I think any sort of insight, it's totally about, well, it's grace. It's really because this isn't, as an insight, it's not something that can be forced. It's like how we get told things our entire lives as to how to act or how to be or what's good for us and all that kind of stuff. And it's only until we're completely ready that we take on anything like that. And this is the exact same thing. So it's about, I think, if there's curiosity is the key. You know, that is the key, is that if it is something, if you're listening to this and there is that curiosity of like, what is that? You know, like, because you might be able to get a sense of that it's very significant or just interesting. If that curiosity that is there, then it is just about opening yourself up to maybe multiple different sources potentially of taking on this information. So I think being guided in some way can be helpful, because it is quite a head fuck. Because I was going to say, like, walking in nature is great, and I find that really, really helpful. But also it might not be enough to kind of really think for things to kind of click into place. So I think for me, yeah, like it's like talking to someone who is interested in this sort of stuff and reading, and then reflecting on what you've read and just sitting with it and allowing it to kind of ruminate and just settle, and giving yourself enough space to allow insight to arise on its own. You know, so it's not something to be forced, but it's just like putting yourself in a context where there is some stillness, where you have some space, and then just dropping in input, whether in podcast form, you know, through a book, and just seeing what happens. Yeah, that was a bit of a long answer, but yeah.
No, that was good, man. I like that. Well, that's not where I thought the podcast was gonna end up going, but I'm happy it did. The quote for next week actually is from Douglas Adams, who is the guy who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I mentioned earlier. And the quote is as follows: "Isn't it enough to see that a garden is beautiful without having to believe that there are fairies at the bottom of it too?"
Nice.
And yeah, if you've got any thoughts about the quote, it'd be really cool to hear what you think. So just send us a DM on Instagram, which is knowwhatimean.podcast, or you can send us an email. We'll have a link to that in the description. And if you want to help us out buying us a coffee, that would be amazing. We've got a link down in the description to do that as well. And yeah, if you think of anyone who'd love the podcast or you think might find these topics interesting, then we'd love it if you'd share it with them as well.
Sweet. Thanks for listening.
Nice one. Have a good week, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Adios.